The blood staining Juliet Voss's hands wasn't her own, and the dying man's whispered warning still echoed in her ears as she fled westward with nothing but a stolen horse, a carpetbag of tools, and the knowledge that remaining in Kansas City would mean her neck in a noose for a murder she didn't commit. 3 months of running had brought her to the high desert country of western Colorado in the summer of 1878, where the August sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty road leading toward Montrose. Juliet had learned to keep her head down, her auburn hair tucked beneath a worn hat, and her gender ambiguous enough that most folks didn't look twice at the lean figure passing through. She'd survived by doing what her father had taught her before consumption took him fixing things: wagons, wheels, harnesses, anything mechanical that broke in this unforgiving land. She worked for food, sometimes a place to sleep, and moved on before questions could be asked. The wagon she spotted that afternoon sat listing badly to one side about a mile outside Montrose, one wheel completely shattered and the axle cracked clean through. A man stood beside it, hands on his hips, staring at the damage with the kind of stillness that spoke of a man calculating just how bad his situation had become. His horse grazed nearby, still hitched but unable to pull the crippled wagon another foot. Even from a distance, Juliet could see the supplies loaded in the bed, enough provisions to suggest he'd come from town and was heading somewhere remote. She should have ridden past. Every instinct screamed at her to keep moving, to not get involved, to remain invisible. But 3 things stopped her. The sun was beginning its descent toward evening. Her own supplies were running dangerously low, and she recognized the particular angle of that break. It was fixable if someone knew what they were doing. Juliet dismounted 50 feet away, approaching on foot so as not to startle him. The man turned at the sound of her boots on the hard-packed earth, and she got her first clear look at him. He was tall, probably 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors, with lines around his eyes that suggested he'd once smiled more than he currently did. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt that sat easy on his hips, not a gunfighter's rig, but worn enough to show he knew how to use it. "Wheels broken," he said, his voice rough and unwelcoming. It wasn't a request for help, just a statement of fact. Juliet nodded, circling the wagon to examine the damage more closely. The wheel had struck something, probably a rock hidden in a rut, and the impact had splintered 3 spokes and cracked the hub. The axle had taken the brunt of the wagon's weight when the wheel gave way, fracturing along a weak point in the wood. It was bad, but not impossible. "I can see that," she replied, keeping her voice low and even. She'd learned to pitch it toward the lower end of her natural range, though she'd long since given up trying to pass as male. Too many close calls had taught her that ambiguity served her better than deception. The man's eyes narrowed. Wasn't asking for commentary. Wasn't offering any. Juliet dropped to a crouch beside the broken wheel, running her fingers along the splintered wood. "You heading far?" "Far enough that being stuck here is a problem." He shifted his weight, and she heard the frustration beneath the gruff exterior. "Got a ranch about 8 miles northwest. Was supposed to be back before dark." "Someone waiting for you?" "No." The word came out harder than necessary, with an edge that suggested she'd touched on something raw. Juliet glanced up at the sky, calculating. 2 hours of good daylight left. Maybe 3 if they were lucky. She'd need most of it. "I can fix this." The man's laugh was short and humorless. "Unless you're carrying a spare wheel and axle in your saddlebag, I doubt that." Instead of answering, Juliet walked back to her horse and began unpacking her tools. The leather roll contained everything her father had left her: hammers, chisels, a small saw, iron bands, nails, and various implements she'd added over the years. She'd learned to scavenge and improvise, to see potential in broken things that others had given up on. It was a skill that had kept her alive. When she returned with her arms full, the man was staring at her with something between surprise and suspicion. "You some kind of traveling fix-it?" "Something like that." Juliet set down her tools and began examining the nearby terrain. I need wood. Strong, straight pieces. There should be some juniper or pinyon in those rocks. She pointed toward an outcropping about 300 yards off the road. You're serious? Your supplies suggest you need to get where you're going. This wagon isn't moving on its own. Juliet met his eyes directly. I can fix it well enough to get you home, but I'll need help gathering materials, and it'll take time. The man studied her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing his options. Finally, he nodded once. Name's Nathan Quincy. That ranch I mentioned, I own it. Juliet. She didn't offer her last name, and he didn't ask for it. They worked in an oddly comfortable silence. Nathan proved capable with an axe, felling 2 dead pinyon pines that would provide the hard, dense wood she needed. While he cut, Juliet used her saw to remove the shattered spokes from the wheel hub, working carefully to preserve as much of the original structure as possible. The hub itself was damaged, but salvageable with the iron bands she carried. As she worked, she felt Nathan's eyes on her occasionally, measuring and assessing. She was used to men's stares, some suspicious, some leering, some simply curious. His seemed different, more contemplative, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. You learned this from your father? He asked, as he dragged the cut logs back to the wagon. Yes. Juliet didn't elaborate, focusing on heating one of the iron bands in a small fire she'd built. She'd use it to reinforce the cracked hub. He teach you anything else? How to keep moving. How to not trust easy. She glanced up at him. How to recognize when a man's running from something just by the way he loads his wagon. Nathan's expression hardened. That so? You've got 3 months of supplies there, maybe 4. Flour, salt, coffee, dried goods. Either you're provisioning for a cattle drive, which you're not because you'd have mentioned the herd, or you're planning to not come back to town for a long while. Juliet returned her attention to the iron band, testing its heat. Man who owns a ranch 8 miles out doesn't need to avoid town that much unless he's got reason. Maybe I just like my solitude. Maybe. She didn't push it. They all had their reasons, their secrets, their things they didn't talk about. She had more than most. The sun had moved considerably lower by the time she fitted the new spokes into place. She'd carved them from the pinyon wood, shaping each one to fit the mortises in the hub and rim. They weren't perfect, nothing done in field conditions ever was, but they were solid and straight. Nathan had proven surprisingly helpful, following her instructions without question and showing a practical understanding of how things fit together. The axle was trickier. She couldn't replace it entirely, but she reinforced the crack with splints of ironwood lashed tight with wet rawhide that would shrink and harden as it dried. Then she wrapped the whole thing in wire she'd salvaged from a fence 2 towns back, binding it until the axle resembled something more solid than broken. That'll hold? Nathan asked, watching her work. It'll hold for 8 miles if you go careful. After that, you'll need to replace it proper. Juliet sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. Her hands were filthy, her clothes dusty and stained, and every muscle ached. But it'll get you home. Nathan crouched down beside her, examining her work with the eye of someone who understood craftsmanship. Up close, she noticed things she'd missed before: the scar along his jaw, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard physical labor, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled even when he wasn't smiling, suggesting he'd once been a man who laughed often. This is good work, he said quietly, better than good. You saved me sleeping rough out here and losing a day hiking back to town for help. Juliet shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just fixing what's broken. Not many people would stop. Fewer still could do what you just did. Nathan stood, offering her his hand. She hesitated, then accepted, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm and strong, and he held on a moment longer than necessary before releasing her. It's getting late. Montrose is 3 miles back, and my ranch is 8 miles ahead. You planning to ride into town? That was the idea. In the dark, on that road, alone. It wasn't a question. His expression suggested he knew exactly how dangerous that could be. I've managed before. I don't doubt it. Nathan walked to his wagon, checking the repair one more time. When he turned back, something had shifted in his demeanor. The walls he'd had up earlier had lowered slightly, and she saw uncertainty in his eyes. Look, I'm not good at this. Haven't had much practice at talking to people lately, and I'm probably going to say it wrong. But here it is, you fixed my wagon without being asked, without expecting payment, and you did it damn well. That ranch of mine is just me, too much space and work I can't keep up with. I could use someone with your skills, at least for a while, and you look like you could use a place to catch your breath. Juliet's first instinct was to refuse. Getting attached to places, to people, was dangerous. The marshal who'd pinned that murder on her had connections, and wanted posters had a way of traveling west. But she was tired, bone-tired, in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. And something about Nathan's offer, awkward and gruff as it was, felt genuine. I don't stay places long, she said carefully. I'm not asking for long. I'm asking for now. He paused, then added, 3 meals a day, a bed in the spare room, and whatever wages seem fair once you've seen what needs doing. No questions about where you came from or why you're traveling alone. That last part decided her. Trial basis. If it doesn't work out, I leave. Fair enough. Nathan extended his hand again, and this time when they shook, it felt like sealing something more significant than a simple work arrangement. They loaded her horse's lead to the back of the wagon and set out as the sun touched the western horizon, painting the high desert in shades of amber and rust. Nathan drove carefully, mindful of the repaired wheel, and Juliet sat beside him on the bench seat, watching the landscape roll past. The country here was different from Kansas drier, more dramatic, with red rock formations jutting up against impossibly blue skies and mountains visible in every direction. You ever been to Colorado before? Nathan asked. Passed through, never stayed anywhere long enough to learn it proper. It's hard country. Beautiful, but hard. Winters can kill you if you're not prepared, summers dry everything to dust, and the altitude takes getting used to. Despite his words, she heard affection in his voice. But there's a freedom here I never found anywhere else. Space to breathe, space to be whatever you need to be. Juliet glanced at him. That why you came here? Part of it. Nathan kept his eyes on the road. I was in the war. Came back to Nebraska afterward and tried to pick up where I'd left off, but some things you can't pick back up, you know. The pieces don't fit the same way anymore. She knew exactly what he meant. So you came west. Spent a few years working cattle, saving money. Bought the ranch 3 years ago, built a house, started building a herd. He paused. Got married 2 years back. The past tense hung in the air between them. Juliet waited, letting him decide whether to continue. Her name was Margaret. Met her in Montrose. Married her 4 months later. She was beautiful, lively, full of dreams about what we'd build together. Nathan's voice had gone flat, carefully devoid of emotion. She died last winter, pneumonia. Got sick in December, was gone by January. I buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch where she could see the mountains she loved. I'm sorry, Juliet said, and meant it. She'd lost enough herself to recognize the weight of grief. 6 months ago, sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes like another lifetime. He glanced at her briefly. I've been alone since then. Stopped going to town except when necessary, stopped talking to neighbors. Just worked the ranch and tried to convince myself that staying busy was the same as healing. Is it? No. The word came out heavy and certain. But I don't know what else to do, so I keep going through the motions and hope someday it feels less like drowning. Juliet understood that too, the mechanical survival, the day-to-day existence without really living. They rode in silence for a while, but it was a companionable quiet, the kind shared by two people who'd both learned that some things didn't need saying. The ranch appeared as full darkness settled over the land, marked first by a fence line and then by the dark shapes of buildings against the star-lit sky. Nathan guided the wagon up a long drive toward a house that was larger than she'd expected, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch and glass windows that spoke of someone who'd built with permanence in mind. Outbuildings dotted the property. A barn, a stable, a workshop, and several other structures she couldn't identify in the darkness. Even in the limited light, she could see signs of neglect, a fence section sagging, tools left out instead of stored, general disorder that suggested one man struggling to maintain what had been built for two. Nathan helped her down from the wagon, and the simple courtesy felt foreign after months of rough travel. "Stable's there. Get your horse settled while I light some lamps. We'll unload tomorrow." Inside, the house held the stillness of a place where one person lived but didn't truly inhabit the space. The furniture was nice handcrafted pieces that showed skill and care, but everything was utilitarian. No decorations, no personal touches, nothing that made it a home rather than just a shelter. Nathan lit lamps efficiently, illuminating a large main room with a kitchen area, a stone fireplace, and a dining table that could seat 8, but clearly only ever held 1. "Spare room's upstairs, second door on the right," he said. "There's a pump out back for washing up. I'll put together some food." Juliet climbed the stairs, finding the room he'd indicated. It was clean but sparse, a bed, a dresser, a chair by the window. She suspected this had been meant as a future child's room, one of those dreams that died along with his wife. She didn't linger on the thought, just dropped her carpet bag by the bed and went to clean up. By the time she returned, Nathan had assembled a meal of fried salt pork, beans, and fresh bread that must have come from town. They ate without much conversation, both too tired and too wrapped up in their own thoughts. But Juliet noticed small things, the way Nathan made sure she had enough food, how he'd set out real plates and utensils instead of eating from the pan like a man alone might, the effort he was making despite his obvious exhaustion. "I'll show you around proper tomorrow," he said as they finished. "But fair warning, there's about 6 months of delayed maintenance waiting. Fences need mending, the barn roof has a leak, equipment needs repair, and I've got a list long as my arm of things I've been putting off." "That's what I'm here for." Nathan studied her across the table. "Why'd you stop?" "To help me today, I mean. You clearly don't make a habit of getting involved with strangers." Juliet considered lying, offering some easy answer, but he'd been honest with her, sharing things that clearly cost him. She owed him at least a piece of the truth. "Because I recognized something in how you were standing there, looking at that broken wagon. That's how I feel most days, broken and trying to figure out if I can be fixed or if I should just leave the pieces where they fell." His eyes held hers, and she saw recognition there, a mirror of her own pain. "And can you be fixed?" "I don't know yet, but I'm good at fixing other things. Figured I'd start there." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. Two broken people finding themselves in the same unlikely place, both wondering if proximity to someone equally damaged might somehow make the weight easier to bear. Nathan stood, collecting the dishes. "Get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch." Juliet climbed the stairs to her borrowed room, surprised by how solid the bed felt after weeks of sleeping rough. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her, she thought about the strange turn her day had taken. She'd expected to pass through Montrose, maybe stop for supplies, then continue her endless westward journey. Instead, she'd found herself here, on a lonely ranch with a grieving cowboy who needed help and didn't know how to ask for it. She told herself it was temporary, just a place to rest and earn some money before moving on. But as sleep claimed her, she couldn't quite silence the small voice, wondering if maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found somewhere she could stop running. Morning arrived with the pale gray light of pre-dawn, and Juliet woke to the sound of someone already moving around downstairs. By the time she'd dressed and descended, Nathan had coffee on and was packing supplies for the day's work. "Sleep well?" he asked, handing her a cup. "Better than I have in a while." She sipped the strong, bitter coffee gratefully. "You're up early." "Habit. Ranch doesn't run itself, and the cattle need checking." He gestured toward the door. "Come on, I'll show you what we're working with." In daylight, the ranch revealed itself fully. The property sprawled across a valley between red rock ridges, with the Uncompahgre River visible as a green ribbon in the distance. Nathan had about 200 acres fenced, with another section leased from the government for grazing. His herd numbered roughly 300 head of cattle, respectable for a small operation, but clearly more than one man could manage properly. The buildings were well constructed but showing their abandonment. The barn's roof sagged where Nathan had mentioned, and several fence sections needed attention. The workshop, however, caught Juliet's eye immediately. It was larger than expected, equipped with a proper forge, anvil, and an impressive array of tools. Margaret's father was a blacksmith, Nathan explained, noticing her interest. Gave us most of these as a wedding gift. I know the basics, but I'm no craftsman. Always meant to learn properly, but never found the time. Juliet ran her hand over the anvil, feeling the solid weight of it. This is good equipment. With this, I can do more than field repairs. It's yours to use however you need. Nathan leaned against the doorframe, watching her explore the space with an expression she couldn't quite read. I'll be riding the north pasture today, checking the cattle and the fence line up there. You can settle in, look around, decide what you want to tackle first. No pressure. But Juliet had already spotted a dozen projects calling for attention. That wagon from yesterday needs a proper axle before you take it out again. And I noticed your corral gate is hanging crooked. I'll start with those. Nathan nodded, something that might have been approval or relief crossing his face. Lumber's in the barn, along with most supplies. If you need anything from town, let me know and I'll add it to the list. He rode out shortly after, and Juliet stood in the yard watching him go. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The first week passed in a blur of physical labor. Juliet threw herself into the ranch's neglected maintenance with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She repaired the wagon's axle properly, rehung the corral gate so it swung true, patched the barn roof, and fixed 3 sections of fence that were on the verge of collapse. Each evening, Nathan would return from his work with the cattle to find another problem solved, another piece of the ranch restored to functionality. They fell into an easy routine. Nathan would rise before dawn, put on coffee, and head out to work his herd. Juliet would tackle whatever repair seemed most urgent, breaking only for meals. In the evenings, they'd share dinner simple fare that Nathan prepared with basic competence and exchange a few words about the day's work. Then they'd retreat to separate corners of the house, Nathan to his account books and Juliet to her room, both maintaining a careful distance. But despite the separation, Juliet found herself noticing things. The way Nathan's shoulders relaxed slightly more each day when he came home to find progress made on the ranch. How he'd started leaving fresh water by the workshop for her without comment. The morning she'd come down to find he'd made extra breakfast and left it warming on the stove. Small gestures of consideration that spoke louder than words. She noticed other things too. The way grief still gripped him sometimes, catching him unaware when he'd reach for 2 cups instead of 1, or how his eyes would drift to that hill where he'd buried his wife. The nightmares that sometimes woke him in the middle of the night, when she'd hear his footsteps pacing downstairs. The careful way he avoided mentioning anything about the future beyond the next day's work. In the middle of the second week, a neighbor stopped by a rancher named Thomas Crawford who owned the spread to the east. He was a bluff, friendly man in his 50s who clearly cared about Nathan, but didn't quite know how to reach him. "Good to see you have help, Nathan," Crawford said, tipping his hat to Juliet. "Mrs. and I were getting worried about you out here alone." "I'm managing fine," Nathan replied, his tone just short of curt. "Didn't say you weren't. Just saying it's good to have an extra pair of hands, Amiasis." Crawford's gaze swept the yard, taking in the visible improvements. "Place is looking better already. You've got a skilled worker here." "I'm aware." Nathan's discomfort with the conversation was palpable. Crawford turned to Juliet. "You planning to stay on? Nathan here could use someone permanent. Ranch like this needs at least 2 people working it proper." "Haven't decided yet," Juliet said, feeling Nathan's eyes on her. "Well, if you do decide to move on, my operation's always looking for good help. Can't offer much excitement. I've got 5 hands already and a wife who'll work you to death with her cooking, but it's steady work." He smiled kindly. "Though, between you and me, I think you're needed more here." After Crawford left, Nathan was quiet for the rest of the day. That evening, as they ate dinner, He finally spoke. You don't have to stay. If you want to move on, I understand. I'm grateful for what you've already done. Juliet set down her fork. You trying to get rid of me? No. He said it quickly, emphatically. No, I'm not, but I don't want you to feel trapped either. You said this was temporary. I say a lot of things. She met his eyes across the table. The truth is, I've been moving for so long, I forgot what it feels like to stop. To wake up in the same place twice and not feel like I need to be checking over my shoulder. This ranch, the work, it's giving me something I didn't realize I needed. What's that? Purpose. Somewhere I'm useful. A reason to stay in one place. She paused, weighing her next words. But I also know I'm hiding. Running from something I don't talk about. Eventually, that might catch up with me. Nathan leaned back in his chair, considering. We're all running from something. Some of us just run to remote ranches instead of across state lines. Your past is your business, Juliet. As long as you're honest with me about who you are now, I don't need to know who you were. And who am I now? Someone who fixes broken things, someone who doesn't quit when the work gets hard, someone who stopped to help a stranger without expecting anything in return. His voice softened. Someone I'm glad is here. The confession hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to fully acknowledge. Juliet felt something shift in her chest, a cracking of the protective walls she'd built around herself. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Then I'll stay, she said, for now. For now, Nathan agreed. But the way he smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him, suggested he hoped for more than that. As summer deepened into August's full heat, the ranch continued its transformation. Juliet worked with a craftsman's precision, not just fixing problems, but improving systems. She rebuilt the barn's tack room with better organization, created a proper drainage system for the yard that had been flooding during storms, and even fashioned new iron hinges for the house's sticking doors. Nathan, for his part, seemed to come alive with her presence. He started speaking more, sharing stories about the ranch, about the land, about his plans for building the herd. He pointed out landmarks during their rare shared moments, the hot springs 3 miles south, the canyon where eagles nested, the meadow where wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion each spring. They began working together more often, Juliet helping with cattle work when her skills weren't needed elsewhere, Nathan assisting with larger repair projects. She discovered he had a wry sense of humor buried under all that grief, surfacing in dry observations that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He learned that she could outwork most men, had a stubborn streak a mile wide, and possessed an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that bordered on supernatural. One afternoon in late August, they were mending fence in the northern pasture when a thunderstorm rolled in with the sudden violence typical of high desert country. Lightning split the sky. Thunder crashed overhead, and rain fell in sheets that turned the ground to mud within minutes. "Barn!" Nathan shouted over the storm, and they ran for the nearest shelter, a line shack about 100 yards away. They burst through the door soaked to the skin, water dripping onto the packed earth floor. The shack was basic 4 walls, a roof, a stove, and a bench, but it was dry. Nathan got a fire going while Juliet wrung out her hat, and they stood awkwardly in the small space, steam rising from their clothes. "Hell of a storm," Nathan said, peering out the single window at the deluge. "I've seen worse." Juliet moved closer to the fire, shivering slightly. "Kansas gets twisters that'll tear a town apart." "That where you're from? Kansas?" She tensed, realizing she'd revealed more than intended. "I've been through Kansas." Nathan turned from the window, studying her. "I'm not trying to pry, just making conversation. I know, it's just habit. Keeping things close. I understand that." He crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. "But here's the thing, Juliet. We've been living and working together for 3 weeks now. Somewhere along the way, you stopped being just hired help and started being, well, more than that. A friend, I guess. And friends generally know at least something about each other." Juliet wrapped her arms around herself, staring into the fire. The rain hammered on the roof, creating a cocoon of sound that made the small space feel even more isolated from the world. What do you want to know? Whatever you want to tell me, or nothing. Your choice. The understanding in his voice, the complete lack of pressure, broke something loose in her. I left Kansas City in May. There was a gambler named William Hart. He was cheating at cards in a saloon where I sometimes did repair work. Another player called him on it. They fought, and Hart ended up dead. The marshal was corrupt, paid off by Hart's brother, and he needed someone to blame. I was there, I was convenient, and I was nobody important. Nathan's expression darkened. They pinned a murder on you. They tried. I saw which way it was going and ran before they could arrest me. Took a horse and what I could carry and headed west. She finally looked at him. So that's who I am. A woman wanted for a murder she didn't commit. Running because staying meant hanging, and she doesn't have the money or connections to prove her innocence. That's not who you are. Nathan pushed off the wall, coming to stand beside her. That's what happened to you. Who you are is someone who survived something unjust, kept going, and chose to help a stranger instead of just riding past. That's who you are. Tears stung Juliet's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. I'm tired, Nathan. Tired of running, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of not letting myself care about anything because I might have to leave it behind. Then stop running. He said it simply, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. Stay here. This ranch is remote enough that wanted posters don't find their way out here often, and even if they did, you've got friends now. Crawford, me, others. We take care of our own in this country. It's not that simple. Maybe not, but it's not as complicated as you're making it either. Nathan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently brushed a strand of wet hair from her face. I told you before your past is your business. Nothing you just said changes my mind about you being here. The tenderness of the gesture, combined with his words, cracked the last of her defenses. Juliet found herself leaning into his touch, and then somehow she was in his arms, his solid warmth surrounding her while the storm raged outside. He held her carefully, as if she might break, one hand stroking her back in slow, soothing circles. I don't know how to do this, she whispered against his chest. How to let myself stay somewhere. How to trust that it won't all fall apart. I don't either, Nathan admitted. I haven't let anyone close since Margaret died. Didn't think I could. But you walked into my life fixing my broken wagon, and somehow you've been fixing other broken things since then. Including me, I think. Juliet pulled back enough to look up at him. You're not broken. Neither are you. We're just bent a little, shaped by hard things. His gray eyes held hers, intense and honest. But maybe two bent people can hold each other up better than one could stand alone. The rain was easing, the storm's fury passing as quickly as it had arrived, but neither of them moved to leave the shelter of the line shack. Instead, Nathan cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing her cheekbone, and asked silently for permission. Juliet answered by closing the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was sweet and hesitant and full of possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said again, the single word carrying the weight of everything unspoken, not just for now. Stay and fix my heart too, because God knows it's been broken long enough, and if anyone can do it, I think it might be you. Juliet's laugh came out shaky. That's quite a repair job you're asking for. I know. And I'm asking anyway. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. I'm not promising it'll be easy or simple. I'm still grieving, still figuring out how to live again, and you're still dealing with your own troubles. But I think we could figure it out together, if you're willing to try. Every rational part of Juliet screamed that this was too fast, too risky, too much vulnerability with someone she'd known less than a month. But the part of her that had been locked away since Kansas City, the part that remembered what it felt like to hope, whispered that maybe this was exactly what she needed. A reason to stop running, a place to heal, someone who saw her brokenness and didn't turn away. "I'll stay," she said, and meant it in a way she hadn't the first time. "And I'll try. That's all I can promise." "That's enough." Nathan kissed her again, deeper this time, with a passion that suggested his grief hadn't killed everything inside him, just buried it under layers of pain. "That's more than enough." They rode back to the ranch house as the sun broke through the dissipating clouds, painting everything in gold and silver light. Something fundamental had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been building since that first afternoon on the road. It should have felt strange or rushed, but instead it felt inevitable, like they'd been moving toward this moment since the second she'd decided to stop and help him. That evening, they sat on the porch as twilight settled over the valley. Nathan had his arm around her shoulders, and Juliet leaned into his warmth, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. "Tell me about Margaret," she said softly, "if you want to." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "She was good. Kind in a way that seemed effortless, where for most people it takes work. She loved this land, loved the idea of building something lasting here. She wanted children, lots of them, filling this house with noise and life." His voice roughened. When she died, it felt like all those futures died with her. Like I'd lost not just who she was, but everything we were supposed to become. "I'm not trying to replace her. I know. And I'm not asking you to." He tightened his arm around her. "Margaret was my past, and I'll always love her for what we had. But she's gone, and I spent 6 months trying to follow her into the grave through sheer loneliness and work. Then you showed up, this fierce woman who fixes impossible things, and reminded me that maybe I'm not done living yet." Juliet turned to look at him. "It doesn't bother you? That I'm not her? That I'm rough around the edges and running from the law and better with tools than with people?" Nathan's laugh was warm and genuine. "Juliet, you being exactly who you are is the whole point. I don't want a replacement, Margaret. I want you stubborn, skilled, guarded you, who stopped to help a stranger and stayed to give us both a chance at something new." She kissed him then long and deep, pouring months of loneliness and fear and desperate hope into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan stood and offered his hand. "Stay with me tonight," he said. "Not in the spare room, with me." Juliet took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. "Are you sure?" "I haven't been sure of anything in a long time, but this yes, I'm sure." They climbed the stairs together, and for the first time since leaving Kansas City, Juliet let herself believe that maybe she'd finally found home. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color in the aspens dotting the higher elevations. Juliet and Nathan's relationship deepened, moving from tentative beginnings to something solid and real. They worked the ranch as partners, learning each other's rhythms and strengths. Nathan taught her to read cattle, to spot illness or injury in the herd, to understand the patterns of the land and weather. She taught him finer points of blacksmithing and repair work, showing him how to see potential solutions in scrap materials and broken equipment. The physical intimacy between them grew naturally, an expression of the emotional connection they were building. Nathan was tender and patient, coaxing Juliet out of her defensive walls with gentleness rather than force. She discovered that letting someone close didn't have to mean losing herself, that vulnerability could be strength rather than weakness when shared with the right person. But the specter of her past still haunted her. Every time a rider appeared on the horizon, her heart would race until she'd identified them as a neighbor or passing traveler. She kept her tools close and her escape routes planned, unable to fully relax despite Nathan's assurances. The confrontation came in mid-September when a U.S. Marshal named Edward Stone rode up to the ranch house with a weathered wanted poster in his saddlebag. Nathan was in the northern pasture, and Juliet was alone in the workshop when she heard the horse approach. Something about the rider's bearing. The official set of his shoulders sent alarm bells ringing. She considered running, but running would only confirm guilt. Instead, she set down her tools and walked out to meet him, keeping her hands visible and her expression neutral. "Help you?" she asked. Marshall Stone was a lean man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Looking for a woman named Juliet Voss. I'm told she might be working on this ranch." Juliet's mouth went dry. "What's she wanted for?" "Murder, back in Kansas City. Crime occurred in May." He pulled out the poster, unfolding it to show a sketch that was recognizably her, if not entirely accurate. "You match the description." A lot of women matched that description. Her mind raced, calculating odds and options. She could deny it, but he clearly already knew. Could try to run, but his hand rested easy on his gun and she wouldn't make it 10 feet. "You came all this way for a saloon murder?" "Family of the deceased put up a substantial reward. Makes it worth my time." Stone studied her carefully. "Are you Juliet Voss?" Before she could answer, Nathan's voice cut across the yard. "Marshall, something I can help you with?" Juliet's heart sank as Nathan rode up, taking in the scene with quick assessment. Stone turned his attention to the newcomer. "This your ranch?" "It is. Nathan Quincy." Nathan dismounted, positioning himself subtly between Juliet and the marshal. "What brings the law out this way?" "Hunting a fugitive. Got reason to believe this woman is Juliet Voss, wanted for murder in Kansas City." Stone's tone remained professional, but Juliet saw him reassessing the situation. "This your hired hand?" "This is Juliet Voss," Nathan confirmed, and her stomach dropped. "And she's not just hired help. She's my partner. In business and in life." Stone's eyebrows rose. "You're admitting to harboring a fugitive?" "I'm admitting to giving shelter and work to a woman who told me she'd been falsely accused of a crime she didn't commit. There's a difference." Nathan's voice was calm, but carried an edge of steel. "You plan to arrest her?" "That's generally what happens with fugitives." Stone shifted slightly, hand still near his weapon. "Step aside. Mr. Quincy, this doesn't have to involve you." "But it does." Nathan didn't move. "See, here's the problem, Marshal. Juliet's told me her side of the story. About a corrupt city marshal named Davis who needed a scapegoat because the real killer had family with money and connections. About how a woman alone in the wrong place at the wrong time made for an easy target. That sound like the kind of justice worth pursuing?" Stone's expression flickered not surprise but recognition. "You know Marshal Davis?" "Know of him. His reputation's reached even out here. Man's crooked as a dog's hind leg, and everyone knows it." Nathan crossed his arms. "So I'm asking myself, why would a U.S. Marshal come all this way on the word of someone like Davis? Unless maybe there's more to this story." "Warrant's legitimate, regardless of who issued it." But Stone's tone had lost some of its certainty. "A warrant based on what evidence, witnesses, or just the say-so of a corrupt local lawman who needed to close a case?" Juliet found her voice. "I didn't kill William Hart. I was in the saloon that night doing repair work when he got into a fight over cards. By the time I came out from the back room, he was already dead, and Marshal Davis was deciding I looked good for it. Probably because Hart's brother paid him to find someone, and I didn't have money or family to fight back." Stone was quiet for a long moment, his sharp eyes moving between them. Finally he sighed. "Get inside, all of us. This conversation needs to happen without an audience." In the house, over coffee neither Juliet nor Nathan touched, the marshal laid out what he knew. Davis is under investigation by the federal government for corruption, has been for months. But investigating a law officer requires proof, which means building cases against him from every angle. Your situation in Kansas City, it fits a pattern, at least 3 other arrests in the past year that look questionable on paper. Hope flickered in Juliet's chest. "So you're not here to arrest me?" "Didn't say that." Stone leaned back in his chair. "I'm here because the warrant exists and my job is to enforce the law, but I'm also here because I don't trust Davis further than I can throw him, and I wanted to see for myself what kind of person I was hunting. And? Nathan's hand found Juliet's under the table, squeezing tight. And I see a woman who's clearly been working an honest job, building a life, not causing trouble. I see a man vouching for her character who strikes me as decent and straightforward. Stone drummed his fingers on the table. I also see a case that stinks to high heaven and likely won't hold up under real scrutiny. What are you saying? Juliet hardly dared to breathe. I'm saying the federal investigation into Davis is ongoing. I'm saying that if you were to come to Denver with me voluntarily to give testimony about your experience with him, it might go a long way toward building the case we need. And if that case results in Davis being removed from office, a lot of his questionable arrests might get revisited. Nathan's grip on her hand tightened. You want her to walk into custody on the promise that maybe someday the charges get dropped? I want her to take a chance on the system working the way it's supposed to, on justice being served for everyone, not just folks with money and connections. Stone met Juliet's eyes directly. I can't promise outcomes, but I can promise that your testimony would be heard by people who actually care about the truth, and I can promise that I'll personally ensure you're treated fairly through the process. It was a gamble, one with her life on the line. Juliet looked at Nathan, seeing her own fear reflected in his eyes. What do you think? I think running forever isn't living, and I think you deserve better than looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. Nathan's voice was rough with emotion. But I also think I'll follow you to Denver and raise hell if anything goes sideways. You won't face this alone. Juliet closed her eyes, weighing the terrible choice before her. She could refuse, try to run again, spend the rest of her life as a fugitive, or she could trust a system that had already betrayed her once, gamble everything on the slim hope that truth might actually matter. If I do this, she said slowly, what happens? Specifically. Stone outlined the process. She'd travel to Denver with him, voluntarily surrendering to federal custody. She'd be held in a proper jail, not a cell, while giving her testimony about Davis and the circumstances in Kansas City. The federal prosecutors would investigate her claims alongside their other evidence. If their case against Davis succeeded and his corruption was proven, they'd petition to have his questionable arrests reviewed and likely dismissed. Timeline? Nathan asked. Weeks, possibly months. These things don't move fast. Stone's expression softened slightly. I know it's not ideal, but it's the best path forward I can offer. Juliet stood walking to the window and staring out at the ranch, this place that had become home, this life she'd started building. Behind her, Nathan and Stone waited in silence. The decision was hers alone, but its consequences would ripple outward, affecting everyone. Finally, she turned. I'll do it. I'll go to Denver and testify, but I need time, a few days, to put the ranch in order, make sure Nathan has help while I'm gone. That's reasonable. Stone stood as well. I'll need your word you won't run. You have it. Juliet extended her hand, and Stone shook it. I'm done running, Marshal. One way or another, this ends. After Stone left with her promise to meet him in Montrose in 3 days, Juliet and Nathan stood in the yard, both processing what had just happened. Then Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding on like she might disappear. This is the right thing, he said. More to himself than her, you're being brave. I'm being terrified. She buried her face in his chest. What if it goes wrong? What if they hang me anyway? Then I'll be there fighting every step of the way. I'll hire lawyers, call in every favor I have, make enough noise that they'll have no choice but to listen. He pulled back to look at her. But it won't come to that. Stone's not Davis. I saw it in his eyes. He believes you. I hope you're right. They spent the next 3 days in frantic preparation. Nathan sent word to Crawford and 2 other neighboring ranchers, arranging for their help with the ranch during Juliet's absence. Juliet worked like a woman possessed, completing as many outstanding projects as possible and leaving detailed notes for everything else. They barely slept, stealing moments together in the darkness, holding each other with desperate intensity. On the 3rd morning, Nathan saddled 2 horses. I'm coming with you to Montrose. You don't have to. Yes, I do. His tone brooked no argument. And I'll follow to Denver. I'm not letting you face this without someone in your corner. Marshal Stone was waiting at the Montrose Hotel when they arrived. He'd arranged for a private stage that would take them to Denver, along with proper accommodations and clothing for Juliet. Better you arrive looking like a respectable citizen than a captured fugitive, he explained. Appearance matters in these things. The goodbye with Nathan was harder than anything Juliet had ever done. They stood in the hotel lobby, hands clasped, trying to fit a lifetime of words into minutes. I'll be right behind you, Nathan promised. 2 days at most, after I get things settled at the ranch, and I'll be there every day of this process. I'm scared, Juliet admitted. I know. So am I. He kissed her gently. But you're the strongest person I've ever met. You'll get through this. We'll get through this. And if I don't come back, Nathan's eyes blazed. You will. I believe in justice, Juliet. Real justice, not Davis's corrupt version. And I believe in you. In us. He pressed something into her hand, a small leather pouch. Open it later. The journey to Denver took 3 days. Stone proved to be a decent traveling companion, neither treating Juliet as a prisoner nor as though nothing were happening. He answered her questions about the legal process, shared what he knew about the investigation into Davis, and expressed genuine optimism about the outcome. In Denver, true to his word, Stone arranged for Juliet to be held in a boarding house under supervision rather than a jail cell. The next weeks were a blur of testimonies, questions, and waiting. Nathan arrived on the 4th day and took a room in the same boarding house, his presence a constant source of strength. Federal investigators interviewed Juliet extensively about her experience in Kansas City. They seemed particularly interested in the timeline of events, in Davis's behavior, in the lack of proper investigation or evidence. They brought in witnesses from Kansas City who corroborated her account, the saloon owner, who confirmed she'd been in the back room during the fight, other patrons who'd seen the actual altercation, even the undertaker who'd noted inconsistencies between the wounds in Davis's official report. As the case against Davis built, prosecutors discovered evidence of systematic corruption, bribes taken, evidence planted, arrests made to benefit wealthy citizens regardless of actual guilt. Juliet's case became one piece of a larger puzzle revealing a pattern of misconduct spanning years. On the night Juliet opened the leather pouch Nathan had given her in Montrose, she found a delicate silver ring inside. Simple, unadorned, clearly handmade. Along with it was a note in Nathan's careful script. For when this is over and you're ready, no pressure, just promise. I'll wait however long it takes. She wore the ring on a chain around her neck, hidden under her clothes but always present. A reminder that somewhere beyond the legal proceedings and uncertainty, someone was waiting for her. That she had a home to return to. The trial of Marshal Davis took place in late October. Juliet testified for 3 hours, detailing everything she'd experienced and observed. Davis's lawyer tried to discredit her, painting her as a transient troublemaker with reason to lie. But the federal prosecutors had done their work well, surrounding her testimony with corroborating evidence and witness statements that made the truth undeniable. Davis was found guilty on multiple counts of corruption, evidence tampering, and abuse of office. The verdict came down on a gray November afternoon, and Juliet felt 6 months of tension drain from her body all at once. Nathan, sitting in the gallery, met her eyes and smiled. 2 weeks later, the federal judge formally dismissed all charges against Juliet Voss. The murder charge had been based entirely on Davis's fabricated evidence and coerced witnesses. With that foundation removed, the case collapsed. She was declared fully exonerated, free to live her life without fear of arrest. Marshal Stone found her afterward on the courthouse steps. "Told you the system could work." "You did." Juliet shook his hand warmly. "Thank you, Marshal, for believing me, for giving me a chance. Thank yourself. You had the courage to face it instead of running." He tipped his hat. "You take care, Miss Voss, and if you're ever in Denver, look me up. I owe you a proper dinner for helping us take down a corrupt lawman." Nathan was waiting with the horses, already packed for the journey home. He swept Juliet into his arms, spinning her around right there on the busy street, both of them laughing with relief and joy. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "It's really over." "It's over." Nathan set her down, cupping her face in his hands. "Now we can start." They rode out of Denver that afternoon, retracing the route that had brought them there months earlier, but everything felt different now, lighter, full of possibility instead of dread. Juliet was no longer running from her past, but riding toward her future. The journey back to Montrose took them through increasingly familiar country. When they finally reached the ranch in mid-November, the first snow of the season was dusting the high peaks. The place looked exactly as they'd left it, maintained by helpful neighbors, but clearly waiting for its people to return. That night, in the house they both now called home, Nathan built a fire while Juliet made dinner. The domesticity of it, the simple joy of being together without fear or uncertainty hanging over them, felt profound. After they'd eaten, Nathan took both her hands in his. "I have something to ask you. I've been waiting for the right moment, and I don't think there's going to be a more right moment than this." Juliet's heart began to pound. "Nathan, let me finish." He smiled, nervous and hopeful at once. "Juliet Voss, you walked into my life on a dusty road in August, fixing my broken wagon without being asked, and then you stayed and fixed so much more this ranch, yes, but also me. You reminded me that being alive is different from just surviving. You showed me that second chances exist, that broken things can be repaired, that love doesn't die just because we've been hurt before." He released one of her hands to pull the silver ring from his pocket. "You've been wearing its match around your neck. I made them both. Tried to craft something worthy of what I felt. I'm not good with fancy words or grand gestures, but I know this. I love you. I want to build a life with you, a real future. Everything Margaret and I dreamed of, but with you by my side. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Will you stay not as my partner or hired help, but as my wife?" Tears streamed down Juliet's face as she nodded. "Yes. God, yes." Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as she somehow knew it would be. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and both of them were laughing and crying at once, overwhelmed by the sheer rightness of it. They married in Montrose 2 weeks later in a small ceremony attended by the neighbors, who'd become friends Crawford and his wife, Marshall Stone, who'd ridden out from Denver to stand as witness, and a handful of others who'd supported them through everything. It was simple and heartfelt. Vows exchanged in the local church with the November wind howling outside and snow falling thick and steady. That night, as man and wife, they returned to their ranch. Nathan carried Juliet over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture made slightly awkward by winter coats and boots. But once inside, with the door closed against the storm and the fire burning warm, the laughter faded into something deeper. "I love you," Juliet whispered, as they stood in the middle of the room they'd shared for months, but now seemed somehow new. "I never thought I'd have this a home, a partner, a life. Thank you for seeing past the walls I built." "I love you too," Nathan kissed her softly. "Thank you for stopping that day, for fixing not just my wagon, but everything that was broken in my world." They made love with the tenderness of new marriage and the familiarity of established intimacy, a perfect blend of excitement and comfort. Afterward, wrapped in blankets and each other, they talked late into the night about their plans for the ranch, for the future, for the family they might build. Winter settled over the valley, and Nathan and Juliet Quincy settled into married life. They worked the ranch through the cold months, caring for cattle, maintaining equipment, and preparing for spring. The house that had felt empty and hollow under Nathan's solitary occupation became warm and alive with both of them filling it. Juliet continued to amaze Nathan with her skills, teaching him advanced blacksmithing techniques and mechanical innovations that improved their operation. He taught her the subtler aspects of ranching, reading weather patterns, understanding market timing, breeding strategies for building a better herd, They were true partners in every sense, each bringing strengths that complemented the other. They also learned each other's wounds and how to be gentle with them. Nathan still had days when grief for Margaret would catch him unexpectedly, and Juliet never resented those moments or felt threatened by them. She'd hold him, let him remember, and then gently draw him back to the present. Similarly, Juliet sometimes woke from nightmares about Marshall Davis or being trapped, and Nathan would stay awake with her until dawn, if necessary, his solid presence grounding her until the fears passed. Spring came, as it always does, with the valley erupting in wildflowers and new growth. The cattle had survived winter well, and several cows had calved, adding to their herd. Nathan and Juliet worked from dawn to dusk, exhilarated by the season's demands and the visible growth of everything they were building. In May, nearly a year after their first meeting, Juliet realized she'd missed her monthly cycle. She waited another month to be certain before saying anything, but when June arrived with the same absence, she knew. On a warm evening as they sat on the porch watching sunset paint the western sky, she told Nathan. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. "Looks like we're going to have a baby around January or February." Nathan's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, joy, fear, before settling on something radiant. "A baby? We're having a baby?" "Unless you know another explanation for why I've been sick every morning and can't stand the smell of coffee anymore." She laughed at his expression. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Nathan pulled her close, his hand splaying protectively over her still flat stomach. "Juliet, I'm terrified and thrilled and more grateful than I have words for. A child, our child, growing right here." Wonder colored his voice. "This is God. This is everything." They spent the summer preparing for the baby's arrival. Nathan converted the spare room, the one Juliet had initially occupied, into a nursery, building a cradle with his own hands and fussing over every detail. Juliet sewed blankets and tiny clothes when her energy allowed, though pregnancy proved harder than she'd anticipated. The sickness persisted through the summer, and by autumn she was large and uncomfortable and ready to be done. The baby arrived on a brutally cold January night in 1880, 2 years almost to the day after Margaret's death. Juliet's labor was long and difficult, attended by the doctor from Montrose and Crawford's wife Mary, who'd helped deliver half the babies in the valley. Nathan paced like a caged animal outside the bedroom, praying to every god he could name that both mother and child would survive. Just after dawn, a baby's cry rang through the house. The door opened, and Mary emerged with a tired smile. "You have a son, Nathan. Healthy lungs, good color, fighting already. Come meet your boy." Inside, Juliet lay exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. Nathan approached slowly, almost reverently, looking down at the red-faced, black-haired infant in her arms. His son. Their son. "He's perfect," Nathan whispered, touching one tiny hand with a finger. Impossibly small fingers gripped his in response. "Absolutely perfect." "We should name him," Juliet said. "I was thinking if you're agreeable, maybe Samuel, after my father?" "Samuel Quincy." Nathan tested the name, liking how it sounded. "Yes, it's perfect." They fell into the exhausting rhythm of new parenthood, taking turns with night feedings and diaper changes, marveling over every tiny noise and movement their son made. The ranch work continued around them, neighbors pitching in to help with the heavier tasks while Nathan and Juliet adjusted to having 3 instead of 2. Watching Nathan with their son, Juliet saw the last shadows of grief finally lift from his eyes. He was gentle and patient, talking to Samuel constantly as he worked, pointing out birds and clouds in the distant mountains. The baby became part of their daily routine, strapped to one parent or the other as they moved through chores. "You're a natural father," Juliet told Nathan one spring afternoon as she watched him show 6-month-old Samuel a calf in the pasture. "I'm learning as I go." "Same as you." Nathan shifted the baby to his other hip. "But yeah, it feels right. He feels right. This whole life, you, him, this ranch, it all feels like maybe I was always meant to end up here, doing exactly this. Even though it's not what you originally planned? Nathan looked at her seriously. Margaret and I had dreams. They were good dreams, and I'll always treasure that we had them. But they were our dreams for a different life, different people. You and I were building something new. Same foundation maybe, but different structure, and I wouldn't change it for anything. Samuel grew through that spring and summer, becoming more alert and interactive. He had Nathan's gray eyes and Juliet's auburn hair with a temperament that seemed equally split serious and contemplative at times, then suddenly breaking into grins that lit up his whole face. By his first birthday, he was walking, getting into everything, and demanding constant supervision. "We're going to need a bigger house," Juliet observed one evening after chasing Samuel away from the fireplace for the third time. "Maybe fenced areas outside where he can play safely." "I was thinking the same thing." Nathan pulled out paper, sketching rough plans. "An addition there, expanding the porch, building proper play space. We've got the time and materials. Could have it done by next winter." They spent 1881 building and expanding. Nathan had proven a capable carpenter, and Juliet's mechanical skills translated well to construction. They added 2 more bedrooms. "For future children," Nathan said with a grin that made Juliet laugh and blush and significantly expanded the living space. The ranch prospered, their herd growing to over 500 head with strong demand for their cattle in regional markets. In the autumn of 1881, Juliet realized she was pregnant again. This second pregnancy was easier than the first, and in May of 1882, they welcomed a daughter they named Grace Margaret Quincy, honoring both family and memory. Samuel, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. The years rolled past, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and family growth. They added another son in 1884, Thomas, called Tommy, and a final daughter in 1886, Rose. The house that had once been silent now rang with children's laughter and chaos. Samuel grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved working cattle with his father. Grace was fierce and independent, insisting on learning everything Juliet could teach about mechanics and repair. Tommy was their wild child, always climbing and exploring. And Rose, the baby, charmed everyone with her sunny disposition. Through it all, Nathan and Juliet's love deepened and matured. They had arguments and disagreements like any married couple, navigating the stress of children and business and the endless demands of ranch life. But they always came back to center to the fundamental truth that they were partners who'd chosen each other deliberately and daily. On their 10th wedding anniversary in November 1889, they stood together on the porch of their expanded home, watching their 4 children play in the yard. Samuel, now 9, was teaching 6-year-old Grace to rope a fence post. 5-year-old Tommy chased their dog in circles, while 3-year-old Rose sat in the dirt making elaborate mud constructions. "This is nothing like what I imagined my life would be," Juliet said, leaning into Nathan's side. 10 years ago, I was running scared, sleeping rough, convinced I'd never have anywhere to call home. 10 years ago, I was here alone, half dead from grief, convinced I'd never feel anything again." Nathan wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Then you stopped to fix my broken wagon. And you asked me to stay and fix your heart too." She smiled at the memory. "Best repair job I ever took on." "How's it holding up?" Nathan asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. Juliet rose on her toes to kiss him. "Strong as ever. Might need some maintenance now and then, but that's true of anything worth keeping." "Same goes for yours?" He kissed her back, long and deep, until Tommy made exaggerated gagging noises from the yard and Grace told him to hush. They broke apart laughing and Nathan called to the children. "Come on, you wild creatures, let's go inside. Your mother and I want to hear about everything you did today." The family trooped inside together, bringing mud and noise and boundless energy into the warm kitchen. As Juliet and Nathan worked together to prepare dinner, children underfoot and conversation flowing, she felt profound gratitude for the strange series of events that had brought her to this moment. A broken wagon on a dusty road, a grieving cowboy who saw past her walls, the courage to stop running and the willingness to believe in second chances. She'd fixed his wagon that August afternoon in 1878. But in the process, they'd fixed each other, two broken people becoming whole through love, patience, and the hard work of building something lasting together. Years continued to pass with the steady progression of life on a working ranch. Samuel grew into a young man who clearly loved ranching and showed every sign of wanting to follow in his father's footsteps. Grace, true to form, developed skills that surpassed even Juliet's, creating innovations in equipment and processes that made their operation more efficient. Tommy channeled his wild energy into breaking horses, showing an almost supernatural ability to connect with difficult animals. And Rose, their sonny youngest, proved to have a head for numbers and business, keeping their accounts and negotiating cattle sales with shrewd intelligence. In 1895, when Samuel was 15, he asked his father about the small grave on the hill overlooking the ranch, the one that had always been there but never discussed in detail. Nathan took his son up to the site, sitting on the grass beside Margaret's carefully maintained grave marker. "This is my first wife's resting place, Margaret Quincy. She died before you were born, before your mother came into my life." "Mother's not my first mother?" Samuel looked confused. "No, son, your mother is Juliet. She's the only mother you've ever known. And she's every bit your real mother in all the ways that matter. But before her, there was Margaret. I loved her, and she died, and I grieved hard enough that I almost lost myself. Then your mother came along and reminded me that life doesn't end just because we lose someone, that new love doesn't diminish old love, they just exist in different spaces." Samuel processed this, then asked, "Does Mother mind that you still take care of this grave?" "No. She understands that Margaret was part of my journey to becoming the man who met her that day. We don't erase our pasts, Samuel. We honor them and carry them forward into our futures." Nathan put his arm around his son's shoulders. "Your mother is the love of my life, my partner, my best friend. But I'll always be grateful to Margaret, too, for the time we had and the dreams we shared. Both things can be true." As Samuel grew older and began courting a rancher's daughter from the next valley, Nathan and Juliet watched with the bittersweet awareness that their children would soon begin building their own lives. Grace showed no interest in marriage, focusing instead on developing new ranch equipment designs that were attracting attention from other operations. Tommy, at 13, was still too young for such thoughts, more interested in horses than people. And Rose, at 11, was already displaying the sharp business sense that would someday make her a formidable force in cattle markets. In 1898, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Juliet with a trip to Denver. They'd made the journey periodically over the years for business and to visit Marshall Stone, who'd become a genuine friend. But this time was purely celebratory, a week away from the ranch and children, just the two of them. In a nice hotel room far from the dusty realities of ranch life, they lay together in comfortable intimacy, 43 and 40 years old respectively, their bodies marked by time and hard work, but still fitting together perfectly. 20 years, Juliet marveled. Sometimes it feels like 20 minutes, sometimes like 20 lifetimes. Both, probably. Nathan traced patterns on her shoulder. "I still remember the first moment I saw you approaching that broken wagon. Thought you were just a drifter passing through. Never imagined you'd become my whole world. I almost did pass through. Almost convinced myself to keep riding." She turned to face him. "I'm glad I stopped. Glad you asked me to stay. Glad for every single day since then, even the hard ones. The hard ones especially, maybe. Those taught us we could weather anything together." Nathan kissed her forehead. "I love you, Juliet Quincy. More now than when we married, which I wouldn't have thought possible back then. I love you too, always." They renewed their vows quietly in the same Denver church where Marshall Stone had attended their original wedding. It was just the two of them and Stone, who served as witness again. But it felt important, a conscious recommitment to the choices they'd made 20 years earlier. Back at the ranch, their children had planned a surprise celebration. Neighbors from all over the valley had gathered, bringing food and music. Crawford and his wife, now elderly but still spry, shared stories about Nathan and Juliet's early days that made the younger generation laugh. The party went late into the night, with dancing and drinking and the kind of communal joy that comes from people who've built genuine bonds over years of mutual support. As the gathering wound down and neighbors began departing, Samuel approached his parents. "Father, Mother Sarah, and I want to marry. Her father's given permission, and we're asking for yours." Nathan and Juliet exchanged glances, communicating in the wordless way of long married couples. Then Nathan extended his hand to shake Samuel's. "You have our blessing and our happiness. Sarah's a fine young woman, and we'll be proud to welcome her to the family." The wedding took place in spring 1899, uniting two ranching families and producing a celebration that lasted 3 days. Watching Samuel marry his sweetheart, Nathan felt the strange vertigo of time passing. His son was now the same age Nathan had been when he'd built this ranch with Margaret, full of dreams and determination. "They'll be fine," Juliet whispered, standing beside him as Samuel and Sarah danced. "He's learned from the best." "We've done all right, haven't we?" Nathan pulled her close. 4 good kids, ranch prospering, 20 years of marriage, and still crazy about each other. Better than all right, maybe. Definitely better than all right. Samuel and Sarah built a house on the northern section of the ranch property, becoming full partners in the operation. Grace, now 19, surprised everyone by announcing she was moving to Denver to work with an engineering firm interested in her equipment designs. Tommy, 15, was already proving himself the best horseman in the county. And Rose, 13, had declared her intention to study business and finance, possibly back east. "They're all leaving," Juliet said one evening after Grace's departure. Not sad exactly, but contemplative. Growing up and going their own ways. "That's what we raised them to do, be independent, follow their dreams, build their own lives." Nathan pulled her onto his lap in the big chair by the fireplace. "But Samuel's close by, Grace visits often, and the younger two are still here. And eventually," he grinned, "there will be grandchildren, you'll see. This house will be full again before you know it." He was right. Samuel and Sarah's first child, a boy they named Nathan James Quincy, arrived in 1900. Holding his grandson, Nathan felt a profound sense of continuity, the name passing down, the ranch passing down, all the work and love and effort finding its purpose in this next generation. More grandchildren followed. Grace surprised everyone by marrying late at 28 to an engineer she'd met in Denver. They had 3 daughters who visited the ranch each summer, running wild in the same spaces their mother had explored decades earlier. Tommy married his childhood sweetheart and had twin sons who inherited their father's way with horses. Even Rose, after earning a business degree and working in Chicago for several years, returned to Colorado and married a banker, settling in Montrose, where she could help manage the family's growing cattle enterprise while raising her own 2 children. Nathan and Juliet aged together, their hair graying and bodies slowing, but their connection as strong as ever. They passed primary management of the ranch to Samuel while remaining active in advisory roles, teaching grandchildren the skills and knowledge they'd accumulated over decades. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in western Colorado. Known for quality cattle and innovative practices many developed by Grace, or refined by Rose's business acumen. On a warm summer evening in 1918, as they approached their 40th wedding anniversary, Nathan and Juliet sat on the porch they'd rebuilt and expanded multiple times over the years. They were 63 and 60 years old, respectively, surrounded by the sounds of grandchildren playing in the yard while their adult children gathered for a family dinner. 40 years! Nathan marveled. 4 decades since you fixed my wagon. Technically 40 years since you asked me to stay and fix your heart too. Juliet leaned her head on his shoulder. Think I did an adequate job? Adequate. Nathan's eyes twinkled. I suppose for an amateur, working with such poor materials, you did acceptable work. She swatted his arm, laughing. Poor materials, is it? Terrible. This old heart was so cracked and damaged, probably should have been scrapped entirely. Instead, some stubborn woman insisted on repairing it. He grew serious, taking her hand. and she did such good work that it's been running strong ever since. 40 years without missing a beat, pumping nothing but love for her and the life we built. Tears gathered in Juliet's eyes. We did all right, didn't we? We did extraordinary. We survived things that should have broken us, loved through grief and fear, built something lasting that will continue long after we're gone. Nathan gestured toward the yard, where 3 generations of their family gathered. All of this, everything you see, started because you stopped to help a stranger with a broken wagon, and because he saw past a running woman's walls and offered her a home. They sat in peaceful silence, watching the sun set over the mountains they'd come to love. The valley spread out before them, dotted with cattle bearing their brand, fences they'd built, improvements they'd made together. Every rock and tree held memories of hard work and laughter, of struggles overcome and joys celebrated, of a love that had weathered everything time could throw at it and emerged stronger for the testing. "No regrets?" Juliet asked quietly. Nathan considered, giving the question the serious thought it deserved. "If I could go back, would I change anything? Choose differently? Maybe prevent some of the hard parts?" He shook his head. "No. Every choice, every challenge, every moment of pain or fear, they all led here. To this. And I wouldn't trade this for anything. Not even for a life where you never lost Margaret? Where I never had to run from Kansas City? Not even then. Those things shaped us, made us who we needed to be to find each other and build this life. The pain was real, but so is everything that came after." He squeezed her hand. "We got our happy ending, Juliet, not because life was easy, but because we chose each other every single day, through everything that came our way." Their oldest grandchild, young Nathan, approached the porch. "Grandmother, grandfather, father says dinner's ready. Are you coming?" "We're coming." Nathan stood, helping Juliet to her feet with the courtly gesture that had never faded in 40 years. "Lead on, young man. Let's see what feast your mother and aunts have prepared." Inside, the house they'd built and expanded and filled with love hummed with activity. 3 generations of Quincy's gathered around the extended dining table, passing food and stories and laughter with easy familiarity. Nathan and Juliet sat at the head of the table, presiding over the family they'd created together, children, in-laws, grandchildren, all thriving and building their own dreams. As grace was said before the meal, a tradition Margaret had started and Juliet had honored. Nathan held Juliet's hand tightly. 40 years ago, he'd been a broken man staring at a shattered wagon wheel, convinced his life had ended with his wife's death. He'd been wrong. Life had just been waiting, preparing to send him exactly what he needed in the form of an auburn-haired woman with skilled hands and a wounded heart who stopped to help without being asked. She'd fixed his wagon that August afternoon, but more importantly, she'd stayed and fixed his heart, piece by careful piece, day by patient day, until he was whole enough to help her heal too. Together they'd built not just a ranch, but a legacy of love chosen daily, of perseverance through hardship, of faith that broken things could be repaired and made even stronger than before. As the meal progressed with its happy chaos of conversations and connection, Nathan caught Juliet's eye across the table. She smiled at him, the same smile that had captured his attention 40 years ago, and mouthed 3 words, "I love you." He smiled back, his heart, that heart she'd so carefully repaired, overflowing with gratitude and contentment and bone-deep joy. He mouthed back, "Always and forever." And it was true. Whatever time they had left, years, decades, or days, they'd face it together, still partners, still in love, still grateful for the day their paths had crossed on a dusty Colorado road. A broken wagon had brought them together, but love had made them stay. Love and hard work, and the stubborn belief that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on fixing what seems irreparably broken. Their story had started with repair work on a wagon and a heart. It would end someday, as all stories must. But the legacy they'd built in children and grandchildren, in land improved and lives touched, in love demonstrated daily through 4 decades of partnership, would continue long after. And that, Nathan thought as he looked around the table at his family, was the best kind of happy ending. Not an ending at all, really, but a beginning that kept unfolding generation after generation, built on the foundation of 2 broken people who'd found each other and chosen to heal together. The evening stretched on, full of warmth and laughter and love. And somewhere in the workshop, carefully preserved and occasionally displayed to curious grandchildren, sat the iron wheel hub from that long-ago wagon repair, the first thing Juliet had fixed on Nathan's ranch, and a reminder of how the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. It was a piece of history now, but also a promise that broken things can be mended, that strangers can become family, and that love, when given the chance, can fix even the most shattered heart.